Alright, time for another draft science video presentation. So first, well, later, we'll get to comments. And maybe some Stephen Bro if we have time. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, yeah, you just want to, okay, endeavor to persevere, Gary. Come on. You can do it. Alright, pretend this isn't ludicrous. I'm having a conversation. It's just ludicrous to have this conversation. But anyway, alright, so Google, just this stupid thing I noticed today is when they ask you your opinion, how we doing kind of bullshit. And it's always a how we're doing about something I couldn't give a shit about, like email notifications. Sorry, no, I turned all that shit off. Partly because, you get enough comments, who the cares? I mean, you just don't want to read them all. Too much, not enough time in the day kind of thing. And then other people's videos, if you're subscribed to enough people, it's just like, fuck you, I don't want this noise in my life. But anyway, but the point is they never ask you, well, what do you think of our censorship policy? How well do you think we're controlling hostile, crazy psychotics? Are we stopping them from harassing you for 10 years? No. We're stopping the doxing? Are we stopping any of that? No. So they never ask you your opinion of the stuff that matters. What do you think of our sticking ads in our search results at YouTube, like at Google? We put that little ad thing on there, just, the thing that nobody ever notices. Do you like the idea that we're fooling stupid people? Yeah. No, I don't. But yeah, they don't ask my opinion of that shit. So anyway, then Baldy, Catz, okay, it's just the same gripe. I mean, they make these accusations. Maybe I'll put ABscience in the title too. Because, they make these assertions that I'm wrong, that I'm so wrong. It's incredible how wrong I am. And yet they can't produce any counter argument. I mean, like I said, they don't even actually have to produce the video. They just have to direct me to the video that demonstrates how I'm full of shit. So show me the two-slit experiment done in video form or described in a video by a scientist of some kind, or who really cares? A mathematician, somebody who actually describes the actual experiment, what actually happens, and does it in a form that clearly determines that photons must be a wave, that it must be waves that are doing it, and it can be the only possible answer is that waves are doing it. I mean, it's a coherent description of waves. But I don't see this, right? So they make this assertion, this bold assertion, they back it up with absolutely zero content, not a single argument, besides, you're so fucking wrong. You're wrong, 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 wrong. I mean, if I did that to Christians, I just walked up to Christians and said, you're wrong, 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 and I didn't sit there and present any counter theory, didn't even mention evolution, let alone the ton of evidence for it, just said, you're wrong. You think that would persuade them that they're wrong? Ugh. It's just pathetic. Alright. So, to the comments, which are just horrible. I mean, just horrible. Okay, so, Lily post? I don't know. Shall we not look at Earth as a gigantic magnet? I mean, this is so stupid. First off, the video I did on gravity is pretty clear. It explains why there's a lack of energy, okay? That gravity is happening because energy's actually being, in a sense, consumed. That force in the universe goes into matter, and in the process, it loses a little bit, okay? In the process of interacting with matter, that is, moving matter, it consumes a little bit of its velocity, okay? And velocity times mass equals momentum. I don't know. I think they should have a different symbol for momentum. There's no P in momentum. I mean, it's... yes, we have that problem again. Where's the mouse? Come on, mouse, over here. There we go. Much better. Alright? So, force in the universe interacts with matter. Matter, in a way, kills energy. It destroys it by moving, going to a different location. So it was in this location, it went to this location. To get to that location, it had to occupy a force, okay, and cause that force to be, slow down, to go in here at C, to be occupied at less than C, all right, and then to leave at C again. So its velocity, changes for a little period of time, and that little period of time means it lost a little bit of energy. So the idea would be is there would be no perfect equilibrium for matter. Matter sees a certain amount of stuff comes in, and a little tiny bit less comes out. And that little tiny bit less coming out means, because it moves, that the universe is constantly wobbling. You can understand that if I had a box of BBs that had perpetual energy, the little BBs never stop and they bounce off the outside and blah blah blah, and I put something in that box where the BBs bounced off of it, you could sort of understand that this thing would move in all kinds of directions all the time, because there'd never be a perfect amount of energy at any one point on either side, so the little thing would move. And if I made that thing heavy, it would actually absorb energy from the BBs. Even though they left at the same speed, it would end up absorbing some of their energy to do that moving. And that's the source of gravity. Now, nowhere in there is there any kind of repulsion. There's nothing in here that indicates any kind of magnetic effect. And yet this idiot, shall we not look at the Earth as a gigantic magnet? So this is another thing that this isn't even, it's not obscure physics, it's not like hard to find. The fact that the magnetic field is incredibly weak, all it can do is barely move a compass needle. That's right on the surface of the Earth, it can barely move a compass needle. It's not a big giant magnet, okay? It's a big giant, I don't know. It's like putting a magnet this size inside a car and then saying the car is now magnetic. That's how bad it is. Maybe not quite as bad as that as an analogy, but it's pretty bad. It's like a bar magnet this big or something. It's not a huge part of the car. It's not much about the car. And it certainly won't affect the car in any substantial way. Now what it does affect is little ions in the upper atmosphere, and those little ions, those little charged, that is imbalanced little atoms, all turn, because it's a magnetic field, and move in such a way that they end up deflecting a bunch of radiation. So they take on a shape of density, okay, that makes radiation sort of just bounce, a shield of, that sort of shields us from some of the sun's worst rays. And so it does make Earth a little more peaceful on, the surface. But that's, but it's a tiny magnetic field. And that's a known fact. It's just, so what do these people want to do? Why are you asking me this question? Regular physics is a pseudoscience, okay? That's what the real thing. I'm being accused of it by idiots like Stephen Bro. Regular physics is the pseudoscience, okay? It doesn't do this proof with evidence thing anymore. It takes one little seem-like and it turns it into a whole theory, all right? It doesn't do this rigorous prove-it thing. It doesn't bother with that. Any ghost, any dull image of a Sasquatch, any cigar image of a UFO, and they're believers, okay? They don't need any real evidence of entanglement or any of these, spin properties and all kinds of crap. They don't need any real evidence, okay? The Higgs boson, these are all things for which their evidence is so thin and so made out of want. Clearly, it's a religion. Uh, Nothing better in any substantial way. It's substantially a religion in the sense that it has all of its defects. It just has a lot of want to be. They want to believe in magic, and they have just the slightest things like coincidence. That's what religion is based on mostly, is coincidence, and the fact that all humans are a little bit paranoid and delusional. We all can imagine there's a burglar hiding in the closet. We can all imagine little things. We can all be a little bit superstitious. A certain thing happened when some bad thing happened. There was a bluebird out the window, and all of a sudden, ooh, bluebirds are dangerous. We're subject to that. We're vulnerable to being possessed by the demons of paranoia and wishful thinking. So, I don't know what to say. It's just so, well, I mean, the next comment will take care of it, really. Well, at least there's one thing we can agree on. Your fans don't understand your theory. And it's damn true. They're dumb. But the fact is that my adversaries, my opponents, are dumber. Okay, that's the truth. They're not even trying to produce evidence. They're not even trying to make a reasonable argument. All they're doing is photoshopping and quote mining. They're just making these little desperate efforts to say I'm invalidated for some dopey and silly reason. Oh, you have an opinion on, how fat a cow should be, and we don't like that opinion, so, we'll just call you unrespectable. This kind of horse shit. Nothing to do with the actual arguments made, nothing to do with the subject. So you're pathetic, okay? Detractor person. You're the ones who are really pathetic. I mean, you really are substantially dumber than the dumbasses, okay, who might be in the category of, oh yeah, Gary's probably, maybe, possibly right. Yeah, those are dumbasses, and you're dumber. So that's the premise. That's my argument. Do you agree with it? I think you have to, logically. You demonstrate even less capacity to understand concepts. You just go, Twan. There, I debunked you. Yeah, not quite. Or, like Piro, you say something like, amazing that you don't see the waves. They're waving everywhere. We're all made out of spirit waves. Anyway. So, yes, we agree. As long as you understand that you're even in a worse category than the fans. I have contempt for humans. Just about every single one on this planet. I mean, I really, I have a couple of friends that are, I don't know. Yeah, I'm friends, but, that's just a defect in me. Maybe I'm really not being fair, and I really should understand you're an asshole too. A super big, fat, colossal asshole or something, No offense. It's not about weight. Assholes come in all sizes and shapes. It's part of the fun. Oh, shit. So anyway, yes, it is disappointing. 2 plus 2 plus 2 physics, and idiots just keep wanting to throw a 3 in there, or a 7, or something else. They just can't accept, oh, it's simple, you're saying. It's just force and matter, and the force tells the matter what to do, and in doing that, the force gets a little bit tired. Yeah, that's the whole thing. Yeah, that's right. That's how it works. Okay. Is there any experiment that you could conduct yourself that could help prove the ideas about the double-slit experiment? Well, let's understand. I have limited space and limited tools. So some of this is a little, it's just a fact. And some of these experiments require a certain amount of precision. So you need kind of, I'm kind of an eBay, I most of the stuff I own, I get out of the garbage. Somebody else throws it out. I mean, everything I own. just about, is in somebody else's garbage. Yeah, I have a poorly equipped lab, let's say, for doing precision experiments anyway. Screwdrivers, wrenches, hammers, Anyway, but this is a really good question. So I have pointed out that in 2 of the experiments, at least, maybe more. I mean, see, the Stephen Bro experiment was supposed to be an experiment to show the distinction between, like in the radar experiment. Yeah, you can see that. What we were after is some experiment that could demonstrate a difference, when you have 2 sources. And so you're not using a physical impediment. You're not creating wave functions, by probability waves, because there's no mechanical slits. Okay, so you're not using a mechanical slit. You're just having 2 sources at a distance. Point sources. Just like the math. Okay? And the truth is that for radio style waves, that is waves or rays that we have to detect with a receiver, an antenna, and that we have to detect the frequency by modulation and by detecting the frequency by creating a sympathetic resonator, something that can resonate at that frequency and make it amplify it, pull it out of all the noise. And the question is there's the math for jamming, that is the idea that 2 signals would be out of phase, 2 radio signals, for example, and that would make them unreceivable. Now, it wouldn't mean they didn't get here, it just means they're unreceivable when they're out of phase. And then when they're in phase, that is, they're the same distance, they would be receivable because they're in phase, they're both carrying the same signal, it's all transcribable, you'll hear the signal. And, you can hear it twice or 4 times as loud because of demodulation or, just a defect in the transcription of the energy through the receiving process. But anyway, so the point is that you have the 2 competing theories of interference, like somehow, these waves come out here and do this banging into a thing in space here somewhere and kill this photon. It never even gets here. The energy doesn't get here. The energy somehow goes here instead. Or jamming. And then those are the 2, and they're exactly the same math, as it's all dependent on phase and out of phase. So the real point of the experiment was to conduct an experiment that demonstrates that it can't be jamming, or it can't be interference. Some way to exclude one of these as a possibility, so then you'd know it has to be the other thing, because they're both equally strong as explanations, because they use exactly the same mathematics. And so that was the intent, and the intent was basically to demonstrate that there was energy going to the places that are dark. So you have light, dark, light, dark, light, dark in terms of microwaves. Detectable, undetectable would be my argument. And so my argument is it's really here. The energy is here still, okay? It's not dark. And the same is true for the photons in the light experiment with the slits. My contention is no, there's plenty of photons hitting here, in terms of the energy of photons, the bits. They're just not in forms that we can receive. That is, they're too broken into small pieces and chunks, and they don't they don't do what we need them to do, which is to create 9 of these things or 6 of these things in a row. And instead they're in broken pieces still, and the broken pieces can't be recombined into a photon. And they're out of phase, which is also important. But anyway, so the argument is that yes, this would be detectable. Now with the microwave experiment, the way to do the experiment, I would argue, is to have a directional antenna. So that was the part that we hadn't, there was different limitations. The microwave thing has a resonator on it, a diode that's in here. And so the problem is it always detects the same frequency, so you can't detect different frequencies. You can only detect ones that are resonant to this chamber. And so it's a limitation of the type of dish. So if you use a regular antenna to receive it, though, so it sends out the same signal, but you use just a regular antenna to receive it. And then you make that antenna directional by putting a cone around it. Then you can just turn the cone this way from this dark spot, and if you see the microwaves, well, then you know they really are going here. And then you can turn it this way, and if you still hear that signal, well, then you know because what you're doing by directionally changing the antenna is you're taking two signals that are very equal in strength, and you're making one very weak, and that way it'll detect this. Your radio receiver can see this now. So when there's two signals out of phase, if I can make one much weaker, then I can see one of them. And so that experiment would show it. Now another way to do that is also just to say, okay, let's do the experiment, and let's do it with, say, a wet fabric. So I put a wet fabric as the target, and then I just attempt to measure the radiation, the infrared radiation coming off of the fabric. So that'll tell me where the microwaves actually went, because these are still real microwaves. Real microwaves go here. It's a real microwave. It didn't break. It's not in pieces. This one is not in pieces. See, in the photon experiment, they're in pieces, so that's the catch. You know, they're broken, so they're not real in the sense that they're not doing exactly the same thing as they would do. These microwaves are doing the same thing they'd always do. They're still microwaves. All the little bits are still hitting, and all the little bits will still heat water. So if I have a thing covered with water, something that's easily agitated by microwaves, my argument is if I took a picture of it with an infrared camera, right? Well, that'll be my infrared camera symbol. That what I'm going to see is I'm going to see a very even distribution of heat. I'm going to see the heat is going to be very even, and there's not going to be hot spots, hot spot, hot spot. There's going to be just an even amount of heat across the surface. So that would be one way of doing it. Now, obviously, that's an experiment that takes a little bit of stuff, you know, and I don't have the stuff. So, but I would argue you could do the same thing with the two-slit experiment. So you could do the same thing with the two-slit experiment. Shine your light and just have a black surface, all right, that absorbs all the photons. And the argument would be is if you take a picture, infrared picture of that surface, all of a sudden the bars are going to be a lot less significant, because there is still energy hitting these spots, and that energy is going to heat the surface probably just as effectively. And the only catch would be is that the places where the photons do recombine into photons, there is going to be some reflection, and that reflection might be stronger than the actual radiant heat. Okay, so the radiation, you know, that is the energy that's absorbed and then readmitted as infrared, might be a little bit less than the reflected photons. The pieces won't reflect because they're little tiny pieces, so they're not going to reflect they're not as likely to reflect. But the big photons have a higher probability of reflecting, and so it might create, but I'm just saying it will give you probably some indication that the pattern is going to be a lot less strong than it's going to be in visible light. So it's going to be a much weaker pattern, if there's any pattern at all. And so that would be something I've never seen. It seems there's so many people with infrared cameras now. Ken Wheeler, okay, it's a good experiment for him to do. He's got the camera to do it. And Thunderfoot has one. You know, different people have very good infrared cameras. And Veritasium, I'm sure he has one. And maybe even Physics Girl has one. You know, so somebody should do this experiment. Yeah, I don't have a quality infrared camera. I mean, I can make a regular camera an infrared camera in the sense that I can take out the filter and make it more capable of seeing infrared, but it's not it's not real infrared. I don't know how to say that. It's not as good, let's just say. Probably not good enough. But it might be. So it might be worth trying. I actually have an outdoor camera that I got in the garbage, you know, a CCD camera, and it's you know, it has the little LEDs and, you know, shoots the infrared. So it might be worth it, because I have noticed amazing kind of, you know, what reflects infrared is really interesting. Because it's really not about heat. You know, the infrared radiation is a symptom of heat, but it really isn't heat. You know, I mean, infrared light is not heat. It's just associated with things that are hot. It's what hot things produce. And it is amazing what it reflects off of. Some things, you know, surfaces that don't seem totally non-absorbent of heat, you know, and they'll reflect a tremendous amount of infrared. I mean, like all of it, you know, anything that hits them, and they really glow. Just a little piece of fabric, you know, because it's a whatever chemical it has on it. It's like it almost fluoresces under infrared. It's not like it just reflects a lot. It's like it actually is converting, you know, the infrared into double infrared somehow. Anyway, it's so bright. So that's something that's interesting. I've noticed that I might be able to play with. So that's one variation on the experiment. Another way to do it is just to actually measure temperature. That is, create a screen to look at the double slit that's just made out of thermocouples. You know, just made out of little thermometers, and just measure the heat. I would argue that there's every likelihood that if you measure the energy based on temperature, you'll see that the energy is going to all the locations evenly. See, these experiments are just a little bit out of my qualification range, just the slightest little bit, and so some of them I might try. The laser beam light experiments are sort of interesting. You know, people keep bragging that I didn't do. When I did do, okay, I had a tree that was like 400 feet away, and I shined a laser against the mirror, and I did get a reflection back. But the problem was the beam of the laser got ginormous, you know, a foot across. So yeah, you know, you can't measure a micrometer of difference, okay, in a beam that's huge. Just can't do it. But there might be some other way to construct those kinds of experiments to do something. But the interesting fact is that, see, the traditional notion of a photon is that, you know, it's a blob. Like, all of a sudden a photon exists. You know, like in one moment, in 1 second, you know, 1 moment of time, photon is just a big blob. It just exists. You know, just like you catch photons as a bunch of little baseballs coming at you, there's more than one to catch. It takes time to catch a photon. It takes time, okay, time to make a photon. So the whole idea of thought experiments where you're moving something, you know, at a tremendous speed and you're shooting photons, the problem would be is that the photon itself could never be formed, because the photon itself is a bunch of moments in time, and you keep moving where you're shooting it from. So if you're trying to shoot 9 baseballs, right, to somebody else over here, and they're going to catch 9 baseballs, and you're moving really fast, well, obviously, if you're lucky, 1 baseball might get over there, but there's no way the 9 baseballs will get to this guy. They just won't survive the trip. You're shooting them, you know, and they're going all kinds of places. Now, the idea is a spaceship, both sides would have the same liability. Both sides would be moving, so at least you have some chance of catching them. But the problem is going to be is that while they're in space, this movement is going to mean that this thing left at this location, and now it's free, it's independent, doesn't have any velocity in this direction. Once you throw the ball, there's no, like, I'm on a moving train, I throw a baseball, the baseball's still moving that way with the train, still going 90 miles an hour that way, while I throw it that way. That doesn't happen with photons. So obviously you're going to miss all the baseballs because the catcher is going to be here, and the baseballs are going to land here. But they will theoretically all land in the same location, even though this moved, because this moved the same time that moved. Well, that's the whole point, though. This base didn't move. Well, anyway, let's not get into too complex a thought experiment. Isn't that annoying? You know. Yes, thank you for spamming me. Okay, got it. And it doesn't even go back to the right thing. Just annoying. Alright, so finish the comment. Is there any experiment that you could conduct yourself that could help prove your ideas about the double-slit experiment? Well, I've already demonstrated, I think, that their ideas can't work. Alright, and isn't that the part that's important here? I mean, I've pointed out so clearly that their math, okay, admits their theory doesn't work. Two waves won't create. So the traditional statement about two waves coming out of the double slit, we know, first off, this is not the point sources for the mathematics. When they do the math, they either do this dimension, and they don't even bother with this one. They don't even include it in the math. It's so lame. The math is so weak, right? We know, but we know these 2 point sources won't work. So these as wave centers will not create even one of the patterns, right? We know we have 2 patterns. We have this, you know, kind of scenario. So we have 2 patterns, you know, right? This pattern and these little individual blobs. And the idea is this one's missing and this one's missing. It won't create either one. These two, this is point sources, won't create either this little pattern or accurately create this pattern. It won't do either one, right? So this is why the math has this distance in it, because at least this distance gets this big pattern right, okay? This distance gets this pattern right. Excluding this distance means they've made it 0. That means they've made the slit 0 width. And by making the slit 0 width, they can get, well, these numbers still, you know, if they make it 0 width, they still couldn't account for these locations. So they're really just looking at the blobs. But anyway, I've already proven this can't be the point sources because it's not in the math. And secondly, 2 waves can't create both patterns. So 2 waves won't work. You have to have 4 waves to create the 2 patterns. And then I've demonstrated clearly to you when they do the math with 4 point sources, the point sources again are in locations. 4 point sources. This is the only place you can put them, right? There's no way to put wave point sources, right? I could put them here and here, right? But we know that's not what they do. So when they use 4 point sources, which will actually create the 2 patterns, they use right on the surface. And we know that if I drew a wave over that surface, you would say, that doesn't make any sense. How would the wave go half over the surface? And how would it go through the impediment? You know, how would you form the wave here? The wave wouldn't be here. Waves don't do that. Okay, water waves won't do that. So that won't work. All right, so, you know, I've already given you plenty of reason to doubt wave theory. And by just pointing out that sound, if I did a single slit and sound experiment, a bunch of sound goes through a single slit, it won't create any interference. You'll hear the same sound here, 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 here. You know, there's no interference created by a single slit and sound. So wave theory is wrong. That's the important statement. And the second statement is, evolution really works. That is, particles work just fine. Scatter works as an explanation. It fits the math, it fits the geometry, it fits what we know about energy and the movement of electrons. Alright, so, and more importantly, what might it cost? Alright, well, to do like the single photon experiment, you need a, pretty much, I mean, they have diodes now, that, photodiodes that are pretty sensitive. But if you really want to do it right, you use a photomultiplier. Okay, and it's a little bit complicated because you got to use higher voltages to run the damn things, and I don't know why they still make them kind of complicated. But anyways, you're talking $400 or $500 for one that works. So that's a minimum. Now they sell that whole setup, the whole thing Veritasium used, for $5,000. You can buy the whole experiment. But I'm obviously not going to waste $5,000 on a piece of shit, pretty much. So yes, you need something that can count what the photomultiplier produces. So you have the photomultiplier is one thing, then you have to have something that can interpret what it produces as signal, and then they add extras, which are capacities to create error algorithms to pretend something didn't happen that actually did happen because the two events happened really close together, that kind of thing. But that's just manipulation software, so you don't really want to include that. So you're just talking whatever, $700-800, I suppose, in equipment to do a decent, hopefully, job. I mean, obviously, the more money you spend, the more better stuff you buy, and the better way you can do it. But that's an important experiment to do, both to demonstrate that there's no such thing as any place that gets darker when you open another slit. To prove the stuff they claim that they don't have any evidence for. They don't have any experimental evidence proving it. And so it would just be a disproof by just showing how you can't make that work without cheating. Would you use the same setup as in the Veritasium videos? Like I said, I'd use the same basic equipment. I just wouldn't do it from that. I wouldn't buy it from pre-manufactured at 4 times the cost. You just buy the component parts. Out in a different way, videos, but in a different way, are perhaps a completely different approach. See, Veritasium way was fine, except, like I said, he didn't admit the truth. So the obvious defect in his experiment was, well, I've already said it. I don't know if I need to draw it, but I might as well. See, you can change a photodetector's sensitivity, and so it can detect weaker photons in the sense that photons that maybe we can't. So it can do what a frog can do. So we have to see, say a photon has to be this long for us to see it. A frog can see a photon this long. And you don't have to believe in this length argument to understand that frogs see photons we don't see. It's just a fact. And so they're different in some way. And the fact is that the photodetector can be a frog. Okay, so unlike a human, it's not limited to just this. It can do the frog thing. And maybe it can do the, photoplasm thing. And it can detect even smaller. The downside is when you're detecting these frogtons, right? The ones the frog sees. Wow, I'm really camera's fault. Could be a little lower. Okay. If you go after these frogatons, all right, the problem is they can get through things. They can, they'll pass through. So if I cover my experiment, and then I have my photodetector in here in this covered experiment, it's supposed to be completely dark. Well, frogatons can get in there, and so frogatons, you'll still pick up some. So you might get, 7 or 8 a second, right? That's what Veritasium was getting. So he had the photodetector cranked up all the way. So he was seeing what a frog sees, or a microbe sees, or a salamander sees, or whatever. He was seeing photons that we don't see, and that obviously, in some respects, aren't really the experiment, because the experiment is basically with the rules of what we see. Not invisible photons, but visible photons. And clearly, you don't want to do the experiment if you're getting 7 or 8 photons a second, as noise, because you're trying to detect like 1 a second. So you have so much noise compared to your signal that you're going to collect millions of noise photons, and you're only going to have 20 experimental photons, and you're never going to see your experiment through all the noise. But the point is he had to turn it all the way up because it's the only way the experiment would work. And that kind of tells us, okay, that he wasn't getting anything. When he had it at a normal setting, he was sending photons through, and he wasn't getting any light. No photons. So he's getting no photons. He's doing the experiment, he's shooting light through, and he's not getting any photons. So something was going wrong. Well, what was going wrong is that, yeah, he's sending the light through one photon at a time, in a sense it's a very weak light. And so, yeah, none of them, you know, he wasn't detecting any of the incident events, you know, where you're sending photons from both locations at the same time. So there's no photons. And so what he was really just detecting, once he turned it all the way up, he was getting the pieces. He was getting the photons that did hit this thing but didn't get too broken. And one would go here, and then some would go here. And so he's getting some pattern made out of the fact that he was getting some of those broken pieces. And also, because he had it turned way up to get 7 or 8 error photons a second, it means he had to send the light through much brighter. Okay, that is, he had to create more energy sooner. He couldn't say, let's wait an hour for each photon to make it, you know, where there would be a single photon, or 15 minutes. He couldn't let the time be that long because he would collect millions of error photons. So he had to crank up the speed of the experiment to match the speed that he's detecting at. And so, in fact, he did send photons that did, in fact, hit both surfaces at the same time. So he ruined doing the experiment in time-lapse, doing it over a long period of time. Like I said, the original French experiment, for which there's no evidence it ever actually happened, was done over a period of months. Okay, it took months. The guy put a shield over a light source, okay, and put the 2 slits in, put a photographic paper, and he left for months. He let this happen for months to create what was on the screen. So that's how few photons he was getting through. It took months for the photons to create the pattern, or at least weeks. Now, Veritasium did the whole experiment in 10 minutes, 5 minutes. So obviously there's some doubt whether there was ever a point where there was no incident photons. That is, no photon ever hit here and here at the same time. He didn't exclude that possibility because he had to rush the experiment because he had the detector cranked all the way up. And the point is that's the only way he'd get it to work. So the only way he'd get it to work was to marginalize the knowledge that you only had one photon in the system at once. He had to make that doubtable, okay, to make it work. So obviously I wouldn't do that. Yeah, I leave the photodetector at its normal setting where it sees the same photons we see. You know, I can understand it would click, 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 and I could actually see on the photographic paper, click, 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 click. I could see the photons as being real photons, and I would know the detector was seeing the same ones I'm seeing. I'd have it at that setting, and then I'd do the experiment. And what you'll find out is that, nope, you need to have incident photons. 2 photons need to hit both surfaces at the same time, or you're not getting nothing. And in the case of the double-slit pattern, you're going to need photons to hit 4 surfaces at the same time, or at wavelength differences in time, at exactly 1 wavelength of difference. See, I can hit a photon at one surface. Something always going a little buggy. I can have a photon hit one of the surfaces now, and then in 1 wavelength, you know, 500 nanoseconds later, one hits the other slit, and I can have that recombine into a photon. I can create the phase shift at either the source or the destination. Alright, what else? Would you use the same setup? No. In a different way? Yes. Or perhaps completely different approach? Well, the approach would be to find the truth rather than to make the experiment, force the experiment to produce a result that's marginal. Clearly, Veritasium knew what he was after, and he forced the experiment to produce it. Alright, the last part at the end about the big statue was pretty funny. Oh, okay, yes. And I agree that it would be pretty cool. Well, anyway, yeah, it's just and conservation of velocity can only be found if you are using, this is, whatever, the double helix model of the photon. So these people who make these assertions, they're just so obnoxious. He just states it. I've somehow proven that the only way it works is this way, and there's no other way it can work. And he doesn't have anything new. He's just taking what the other ministers have said, and he's just reforming the story of, Noah or Jonah and the whale. And, and so, he's just reforming it. He's taking the same story and he says, well, it could be a real whale. I mean, even though whales have a really small throat, because they eat just little tiny things. Most whales. I'm not sure if it's all, though. But anyway, it doesn't really work as a story. So then you explain, oh, okay, it was a particular kind of whale. So it was a sperm whale? I don't know what. There is a kind of whale that has teeth and actually eats stuff, I think. Yeah, it was like the great white whale. It wasn't a baleen whale. It was some other kind of whale. Anyway, so he's just taking their crap and trying to reform it. And it's just such a waste. Talking about the amplitude of these stupid waves. And the point is you have a function. See, these assholes, they have this notion because regular physics says it. They have this notion. Again, I had the notion. I mean, I didn't realize until I actually attempted to understand, that light has a huge polarization. A single photon has a gigantic polarization. Thousands of atoms, 2,000 atoms worth of polarization. It's a real thing. You can test for that, okay? And it's not some, it changes all the time or something like that. You put polarized light through a filter, it comes out a certain polarization, and you can put through another filter and all the light will go through, or you can put through the opposite filter and none of it will go through. So its polarization is a real feature of it. It's really something to do with this wave you're saying that's traveling. And an electron is 1,000,000 times smaller than that polarization. So I'm just saying, as a practical matter, how can you think this gigantic, huge, gigantic thing, this amplitude of electric field and this amplitude of magnetic field, can possibly hit just one little thing that's 1,000,000 times smaller than that polarization? How can one photon interact with one electron? Clearly, only pieces of the photon can interact with an electron. Pieces created, just as it was created at its source by numerous atoms. Electricity traveled through numerous atoms, okay, just like an antenna, like all the other electromagnetic radiation. Photons are created by antennas, little atomic antennas that shoot the bits of the photon at different times, because it takes time for the electricity to move, and those different times mean the quanta of the photon is in different positions in space, okay, and that's the polarization, and that's the wavelength, and that's why the two of them, the frequency and the polarization, that's why they're proportional. It's because they're being created by the same effect, electricity traveling through atoms. It's just, again, it's just pseudoscience. They're just going to keep making these cigar photos into UFOs, and there's not much to do. You can only rationally argue. Here, I'm showing you. Their description is irrational. It can't work. This description works. All right. using Richard Feynman's diagrams, I'm sorry, that again is childish nonsense. It's just made up mathematical models. They don't really have anything to do with anything. Yes, we know certain outcomes happen. Photon goes into a material substance, but it doesn't do this interacting with individual electrons as a whole entity. It only does it, millions of them hit, and millions of them create the electricity, and millions of them move through the wire. It's a generalization reduced to a simplification, but it's not the truth. One photon as a whole thing, it does not interact with one electron. Okay, you can split the positive and negative, so there's no positive and negative of the photon. Photons don't have any such thing. They don't have a spin. It's just nonsense. Two photon helixes and recombine them as one electron and one positron. So this is more nonsense about how they make an atom, or I mean they make electrons and protons out of photons. There's no hard evidence for any of this crap. It's just made up, just like the positron. It's made up. You know, even they call something like positron emission imagery or something. The positron isn't in, you know, the beam. It isn't in the radioactive material they shot into the person. It's in their theory about what happens inside the person. It has nothing to, it doesn't have any role to play in making the actual image. It's just theoretical mush. And it's sad that you're believing. You know, somebody told you that the world's made out of gingerbread, and you're just assuming it is. And it's a silly assumption. Alright, that is as far as anyone has ever gotten. They haven't gotten anywhere. And as to date, no math goes past that mark. Well, no math is in a sense, math is just another way of describing something, and you can't describe events that take place over this much time in this much time. You're cheating the event, just like not understanding that photons aren't emitted instantaneously. They're emitted over a period of time, and they're received over a period of time. You're just cheating to say, no, it happened here, or it happened here, because it never did those things. That never happened in the physical reality. Your model is cheating the physical reality. Alright, the following image is a very good and simple explanation for the inverse square law. I don't think so. Using a spray can. Its spray cone perfectly illustrates the, again, you know, it really isn't a very good explanation. I think a light bulb, and understanding rays coming out of a light bulb in all directions would be a better way of understanding. But regardless, I mean, obviously spray cans don't shoot in all directions, you know. It's kind of a more laser beam kind of thing. Anyway, radial concentration of the corpuscles of the paint that this law implies. So again, these are you know, analogies, all right, but they're not perfect analogies because it isn't actually true. Because spray paint, the paint isn't perfectly separating the little particles of paint in both dimensions. They're closer to each other at a distance. You won't get a good inverse square law from spray paint. So it's not really a very good way of illustrating. So this is an illustration. Now, the cheat of the illustration is this isn't a real spray can. Real spray cans don't do that exactly. So, but real suns do. And real light bulbs pretty much do. And lots of other things act like true point sources. And if it's a true point source that's shooting just as much energy this way as this way, and this way as this way, and you know, in all directions, then it'll be the inverse square law in terms of the energy going from point A to point B. But none of these analogies, the physical things in our world, are nearly this perfect. So this website that he's linking to applies this to sound, and sound isn't perfect. So they're doing perfect mathematics. Mathematics assumes perfect environmental conditions that don't exist in reality. So it's such a distortion. It's really hard to create symmetrical sound. Sound usually we can only make like devices that are narrow in where the sound is going, pretty much. And so that's your first limitation. And the second one is, the environment the sound moves through has all kinds of dirt in it and other kind of molecules, and all those molecules end up absorbing the energy, so it won't travel as far and be the same right strength. It will diminish and all that kind of stuff. So these are not perfect analogies. Is that triangular drawing that just basically points out that when you double a square, a simple argument is what happened? Okay, I have a square this size. What happens if I double it? Well, then I get a rectangle. And if I double it in both directions, though, then I get a square again, and the square is 4 times bigger, okay, than the square that was 1/2 the length and width. So you understand that all I did was make it twice as big, and I made it 4 times the area, and that's all this is describing. But yes, that's what happens when things move away from each other in 2 dimensions. When they're moving away this way and they're moving away this way, they get weaker 4 times as fast in terms of their ability to hit something. I don't know if there's any point in going to the other website. It's the sound shit, so I don't think it's fully applicable. Let me get rid of the gravity comment, because that was just so fucking stupid. People who just want to keep making it's an electric universe, it's a magnetic universe. It's such crap. I hate people. Alright, so evils versus goods. I don't know why this is on this video exactly. I have no idea. Dude, take this as kindness. Fuck you, bro. Shit. If one is to only consider the extreme polar opposites, and where have I ever advocated for that, one will miss out on the nuances of life, like your garden. I don't know where my garden is anywhere in these videos. And again, those are subjective things people appreciate. It's just kind of pointless to say anything like, oh yeah, it proves there's value. No, it's subjective value. It just has to do with how you're conditioned and programmed. It's completely arbitrary. The value isn't in the thing, it's in the perception of the thing. The garden isn't saving the world, it's not curing cancer, it's not doing anything of value. Alright, yeah, I get a bit creepy. However, I said he must have intended this to be on the other video. Bifurcation of logic will lead one to never seeing the happy middle ground. So just more mush. Oh, the middle ground is happy place. Doesn't mean anything. What does that mean? It's mush. That's quantum physics in someone's nutshell. Yes, in your nut. And this just has nothing to do with physics. So why would he put this in here? Why is this a statement here? Alright, so anyway, I did go to this guy's website, and it's just tragic. So this is a perfect example of what these deluded nonsense people get themselves into. He's got a kid who's totally fucked. Seizures, all kinds of, I didn't even watch all of it because it's just too damn depressing. Creepy fucking horror. And this asshole is making excuses for it. It's all okay. It's just so bad. You're an example of exactly where your silly, deluded nonsense gets people. What kind of mess it makes. You're a perfect example. Your silly delusions that you have some reason to roll these dice. No, you have no good reason. There's no middle ground where rolling the dice makes sense. There's just huge, stupid, moronic losses to be created, and that's it. You can spill milk and clean it up. Well, why would you do that? You spilt milk and you can't clean it up. So, I mean, you're a perfect example of where this milk spilling thing doesn't go anywhere. The best case scenario is you clean up the mess you made, and the worst case scenario is you don't. And you run a deficit. You have huge losses. You bleed out. I mean, you're just so stupid. Oh, fuck. People. So annoying. The point is not to make messes. Yes, while we're here, we have to clean them up as best we can and try to whistle while you work. I'm all for whistling while you work. But if your work is, I'm going to make some more messes. I'm going to drill some more holes in the dam for no damn good reason. I'm going to take some more risk and more chances. I'm going to jump up and down, see if I can cause an earthquake. I mean, you're a fucking menace. All right? You're not trying to clean up. You're not trying to not make a problem. You're saying it's okay to make problems that don't need to exist. Stupid fuckers. See who the fuck this is. That's the wrong video. That's the wrong video. Well, it should be here. I went to the trouble. Let's see. Is that Stephen Bro? No. Is that Stephen Bro? Come on. Title. No. No. Where the hell is it? Should have been right like here. Yeah, it's here. Yeah. I clicked the wrong tab, I guess. Alright, so I left off here. I don't know. He's just gibberishing about 10 million subjects, and so I'll play a little bit of it, but I probably won't be able to tell what he's saying because I can't play at regular speed. It's just too tedious. But anyway, we'll see what happens.
You have to, knowing full well that you're not going to accept the results no matter what. You will argue.
Okay, so his whole premise is that he did this whole experiment premised on a lie, that he was going to demonstrate me to be wrong, and that's really all he was trying to do. And he pretended like he gave a shit about answering this question. You know, proving jamming couldn't be the cause. That was the objective. To see whether we could prove that jamming couldn't be the explanation. Alright. Or that, you know, waves couldn't be. Just to do it in such a way to demonstrate that these photons are not entangled. These photons are not wave functions. They never went through a slit. They never got disturbed. They never got irritated or agitated. So why would they be in the form of wave functions? Nothing turned them into wave functions. Nothing Heisenberged them. We didn't make any measurement on them to fuck them up. So how did they get fucked up? And the point is that you could do the simple experiment, the one I wanted him to do that he never did, where you just put the antenna in the middle between the two. Okay, so instead of having both horns over here, right, sending a signal, you just put one of the horns over on this other side and put the antenna in the middle, the receiver, and then move the receiver, and you'll see that you get the same pattern. And so the whole thing is just a bullshit. There's no way the waves are interfering. It's just about jamming.
The result and say, no, it wasn't making up or flawed concepts, and the only test is this, or it's impossible to say. I don't know, you will have an excuse. That's your talent, Gary.
Yeah, so whatever. You know, that's what you call it. You do sloppy, shitty science and then use the errors that you've created and the sloppiness of what you've done to say, there, I've proven something, when you didn't prove shit. So just like the Veritasium experiment, there's obvious defects in your approach.
Making excuses, dodging accusations, and saying...
So again, I didn't dodge anything. Nothing was hidden. Nothing's... I mean, what other question was there, moron? Did you answer the question? Did you prove it can't be jamming in some way? Did you solve anything? Did you take any mystery out of the question that was at issue? No.
say that, I said it the other way, and nobody can be bothered to look up the information to check what you actually did. Well, I can be bothered, so that's why it's taking me ages to upload any videos. I've cleared the way, I've got rid of all my videos temporarily. Well, they aren't deleted, they're just gone for now, you know what I mean? Made private, but
why? Yeah, exactly. Why did you do that, though? For what purpose?
I can put them up anytime I want, but I just want to start afresh. Because all those videos, they can...
Well, good. Yes, that would be good. So, but your fresh start looks just like your old mess. It's just as messy as arguments. And if your arguments are going to be about some silly semantics and not about any of these principles, then again, what's the point? Again, you didn't even understand, okay? After all those conversations, you didn't even understand what the experiment was attempting to demonstrate.
Confusing to people. I made too much... I gave too much detail about how I was making the transmitter, how I was doing this, and how... Even I...
Yes, all of that crap was a little bit like crap. Yes, I'm sorry you had to solder this, and I'm sorry you had to fix this, and you had to go through that crap, and you had to go through that crap. Sorry, I didn't ask you to do any of that shit. Again, if I would have known the radar dishes were completely dependent on a vibrating diode and a resonating chamber, I would have said don't bother. Okay, it's not the kind of experiment we need to do. Something that's frequency narrowing and dependent isn't going to give us the information you're after.
I'm fucking bored by it. So it's a disaster zone. Now this one you're looking at here, this one, hang on. This one is a disaster zone. This one, I tried to explain to you how paramagnetism and Lenz's law and diamagnetism all relate to one another. I didn't want to touch on paramagnetism because you know what paramagnetism is, or most people do. Oh yeah, I was supposed to show this one before we did. Yeah.
Well, it's so slight, it's irrelevant in all these experiments. And what the experiment's about is charge and magnetism. So you're not even getting that concept. What this is showing is how charge affects magnets, which is the more important subject, the more interesting little bit, another area that science hasn't explored very deeply.
Yeah, these are the sort of things I thought might make simple radar dishes. Oh, but you see, this has got the label on. I bought more than you.
So now he switches the subjects again. So he's on paramagnetism, then he switches to parabolic antennas for the radar. I mean, it's just all over the place.
Just for your sake. No, I wasn't asking you to pay for it. It was a hobby. And happy to...
Yeah, why should I pay for any of it? Yes, forget it. I mean, you can make an adequate parabolic antenna out of a plastic fucking bottle that you put foil over. I didn't ask you to buy anything. Oh, fuck.
To do it up to a point, except when you start calling me my efforts crap and saying that, you know, inferring that I've not even tried. You know, because you're a lying cunt, that's what you are.
So I didn't lie about anything, and I never suggested you spend 10 cents on any of this shit. So again, this argument is just such a pile of crap. It's, you know, I clearly didn't lie. But are you going to say I'm lying if I say to you that I suggested we find somebody who already has the equipment? You're going to say that didn't happen?
I tried very hard, and I wasn't asking you to pay anything. The only reason I'm suggesting...
Right, you weren't asking, and so why is this my liability now? Why are you resentful towards me? I didn't ask you to do a fucking thing. You volunteered, and then you did it poorly, and I'm supposed to say thanks a lot for doing it poorly. Never doing actually what you were supposed to do, because you got distracted by recording this singer and doing this thing and taking care of somebody else's kids and all the other crap you were doing. Fine, you have a life and you want to live your life. Well, don't tell me you're going to do something and then you never do it. Yeah, okay, you were busy with other experiments. You had a room full of pillows and you're doing sound experiments. Well, okay, fine. I'm not interested. I already know how sound works. Sound is a wave. Sound is a vibration in a medium. Okay? You know, connected medium. Little molecules that are stuck to each other because of air pressure. So, what does this have to do? It's not comparable to fucking photons. I'm not really interested. It's not the subject of electromagnetic radiation. Sound isn't electromagnetic radiation. Unlike what you idiots think.
Now that you donate some money towards a suitable fund, it's because you've been an ungrateful cunt about it.
No, I was done with you. Why should I be grateful to some asshole who sits there and turncoat stabs me in the fucking back and actually starts working with one of my biggest adversaries on YouTube was fucking Hoffladay, for fuck's sake. The guy made shit videos saying shit crap And I'm supposed to say thank you to you because you joined forces with this fucking moron? And I'm supposed to say, well, what a great guy you are. Fuck you. You backstabbing little weasel.
And trying to cover too much ground at once. Now, yeah, this one here.
And again, he's always revealed his true colors. He's already pointed out that the whole reason why he got into this was to prove me wrong. To prove that I was being unfair to poor Professor Lewin.
I was trying to explain why. I was trying to differentiate, explain, as clear as I possibly could, the difference between Lenz's law, diamagnetism, paramagnetism. And unfortunately...
yeah, and you won't get to it until 6 minutes and 14 seconds into the video.
I do generally feel sorry for you, because you seem like...
Go shove that up your ass. I don't feel sorry for you. You're a fucking disaster. A piece of blight. A lying sack of weaselly shit.
Generally trying to understand things, but you've genuinely got your wires crossed.
No, I don't have any important wire crossed, fuckhead, and you've never demonstrated I have any important wire crossed. Again, you haven't explained why jamming doesn't explain the radar experiment. Why don't you explain how jamming doesn't work? How it doesn't have anything to do, how the geometric drawing you would do and the geometric math is somehow different than the wave math. Wave interference and jamming. Show how the two are completely different mathematically or geometrically. Show that, fuckhead.
And for the 2 years or so since you made this, every time I've watched this, your response to it, I think, where do I start explaining to you why you're wrong, Gary?
I'm not wrong in the sense that, yes, I'm using the wrong vernacular. I use the wrong, it's diamagnetic versus paramagnetic. Again, it was my impression that those two functions had something to do with the relationship between charge and how magnets function. Clearly, I know now that's not true, but I still don't think it's sensible to think of Lenz's law as a current, because the current isn't in a fixed space. The current is just the atoms changing. There is no real current because there's no place where it travels. Oh, how to say that? That's even the wrong way to say it, but it's clearly disturbed by you cutting gaps, okay, and changing the resistance of the material. But that just has to do with clogging the ability of the conductor to conduct. A conductor can't conduct a current if you put a bunch of jabs in it, and the conductor has to move the current through all of this. Then obviously it's going to generate more heat and it's going to lose a lot of the energy. But anyway, I don't want to get into the details of that.
I don't want to be mean to you when I respond to this, because I always feel sorry for you listening to you.
Oh, go just fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself, you lying little sack of shit.
I can see and hear the cog working in your head, trying to figure out how paramagnetism, diamagnetism, ferromagnetism, and lenses all work together. And it's like you're almost getting it, and you're...
Now, they don't work together is the whole point. They don't really have a damn thing to do with each other. Not a damn thing.
Not, and it's so frustrating because you keep thinking that magnet trains and paramagnetism have got some kind of connection. There's no connection whatsoever. But it seems to me that at certain points you keep connecting paramagnetism with Lenz's law. There's no relationship between paramagnetism and Lenz.
Yes, I'm conceding. You're correct. There's no relationship. But the real relationship I'm talking about is the fact that when you do move something quickly into a material that's a conductor, that material creates, it's not opposing anything, okay, by will. It's merely just creating a duplicate of the environment that you're causing, which is the compression of the electrons. All right, and that's all you can do. You expand the electrons or compress the electrons. If you compress electrons, they become more magnetic. If you expand them, they become more magnetic in the sense of a south pole. Well, anyway, you're just ignoring the important part of the conversation. I don't know how to analogize this, but I mean, you could think about some process you're doing in mixing ingredients or something, and you're talking about some semantical part that doesn't have anything to do with the real important part of putting the ingredients in the bowl and mixing it. The important part is what is the effect and what's causing the effect. Whether you call it paramagnetism or you call it Lenz law, it doesn't matter if you're attempting to describe what actually happened. did atoms change shape? By the atoms changing shape, does that mean they become polarized? Does a row of polarized atoms mean that effectively that's a current? Those are the questions that matter, shithead. Anyway, enough of this. I can only tolerate so much per day. So anyway, it's all this misinforming people, pseudoscience, scary. I mean, stop making false pseudoscientific claims. Well, I'm claiming the geometry for jamming is exactly the same as the geometry for wave interference. Are you claiming something else, shithead? What did I call him? Old Mick Fartard. Old Mick Fartard? Are you claiming something else? Ugh. Anyway. Alright, enough. So, yuck. Yeah, there's nothing else to say. Yuck. Yuck. So, till the next time and such. Yeah, that's probably all I need to say. I'm not sure what the next subject video will be, but we'll see where I go.